The courtroom was silent. Every eye was on her. An elderly black woman, sitting alone in the defendant's chair, her frail hands clasped tightly. The judge, a seasoned man with a reputation for unfairness, looked down at her with an almost unsettling coldness in his eyes. His voice echoed through the room. "Ms. Edwards, you are guilty." But what happened next? No one saw it coming. With a calm yet piercing voice, she reached into her pocket, pulled out her phone, and dialed a number. She wasn't calling a lawyer. She wasn't calling a friend. She wasn't even calling a family member. She was calling the one person who could turn this entire courtroom upside down. Welcome to Stories with Mr. Gray. If you love uncovering the truth and standing up for justice, hit subscribe, like and drop the flag of your country in the comments below. The tension in the courtroom was palpable. As the judge delivered his verdict, the room seemed to hold its breath. Ms. Edwards, an elderly woman with the weight of years and hardship etched into her face, sat motionless. The accusation? Theft. But there was no evidence, only false witnesses, and certainly it didn't make sense. The prosecutor, a man with a smug grin, stepped forward, confident in his success. The jury was already leaning in his favor. They believed it. They had to. But Ms. Edwards wasn't buying it. She had seen too much in her life to let herself be fooled now. Judge Marcus Hayden, known for his unfairness, stared down at Ms. Edwards, his voice cold and unfeeling. "The evidence is clear. You have been found guilty, and the court has no choice but to sentence you to a minimum of 10 years in prison." A collective gasp echoed through the room. 10 years for a crime she didn't commit? An assumption of theft it didn't add up. Ms. Edwards remained calm, her eyes never leaving the judge. She wasn't scared. She wasn't crying. She had something far more powerful at her disposal. Her son. But before anyone could question the situation, the judge continued, "This is what happens when you steal, when you try to take something that doesn't belong to you." Her hands trembled slightly, but not out of fear. She wasn't the one the claimed witness saw. In fact, she wasn't there at the moment of the incident, but they don't give her a listen, or let's say they don't buy her side of the story only because she is a black old woman. But when the judge pronounced her guilty, she wasn't scared. No, not for this. It was something else, something far more dangerous than fear. It was resolve. Her fingers brushed against the edge of her pocket, where she had kept the most important contact in her life. Her son, the U.S. Attorney General. But as her gaze shifted towards the prosecutor, she noticed something. The subtle smirk, the satisfaction in his eyes. He thought he had won. He thought she was just another helpless old woman, a victim of a broken system. He didn't know who he was dealing with. The courtroom fell eerily silent as the judge asked if anyone had any further comments. No one dared speak. The air felt thick, and the tension was almost unbearable. Ms. Edwards slowly raised her hand, causing a ripple of confusion. She wasn't supposed to speak. The ruling had already been made. But as the room's eyes shifted toward her, she stood, her frail body somehow finding strength in this moment. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. With deliberate precision, she dialed a number. The courtroom buzzed, a mix of whispers and confusion. Who could she possibly be calling at a time like this? The courtroom remained silent as Ms. Edwards slowly brought her phone to her ear. The murmur of the room started to grow, people whispering, unsure of what was happening. The judge's eyes narrowed in confusion, unsure of why this elderly woman seemed so calm when she was about to face years behind bars for a crime she didn't commit. She waited, the phone pressed gently against her ear. It was almost as though she was in another world. The atmosphere in the room felt distant, like the walls were closing in on the people who thought they had won. Then the phone call connected. "Hello." The voice on the other end was unmistakable. Authoritative, confident, and undeniably powerful. "Son, it's Mom. I need you to come. Now." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. Ms. Edwards could almost feel the weight of her son's silence. It wasn't an ordinary mother-son conversation. It was a call for help, Her voice wavered just slightly, but her son knew something was wrong. "Mom, what's going on? Are you all right?" His voice dropped to a tone of concern. "I'm fine, but I'm not the one you should be worried about," she replied, her voice steady but carrying an undeniable weight. "I need you here. The judge. He's framing me." The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to go off. For a moment, the courtroom fell completely still. Everyone was waiting for a response. The judge raised an eyebrow. The prosecutor looked visibly confused, uncertain whether he should interrupt. They were all wondering the same thing. Why was this woman so sure of herself? But Ms. Edwards wasn't just any woman. She wasn't some defenseless grandmother who could be pushed around. She wasn't some nameless person trapped by the system. She was the mother of one of the most powerful men in the country, the U.S. Attorney General. On the other end of the phone, her son's face hardened. "What do you mean, framed?" he asked, his voice now ice cold. It was clear the stakes were no longer about his mother's fate alone. This was a matter of integrity, a matter of justice, a matter of something much bigger than he could ignore. "I'm in court, son. The judge just sentenced me for something I didn't do. He's corrupt and the prosecutor, he's in on it." The words hit like a punch. The U.S. Attorney General, now fully awake to the enormity of the situation, had no doubt about the seriousness of his mother's words. "Stay calm, Mom," he said, his voice steady. "I'll be there in minutes. I'll make sure this gets sorted out. You're not going to jail." The promise in his voice was more than words. It was power. The kind of power that could dismantle entire systems, the kind that could bring down those who thought they were untouchable. And the judge, the prosecutor, and the entire courtroom didn't know what was coming. In the courtroom, Ms. Edwards ended the call, her hands still shaking, but this time from something different. It wasn't fear, it was the calm before the storm. She turned to face the judge, who stood behind his bench, trying to maintain an air of authority despite the unexpected interruption. The prosecutor's smug grin had faltered. "I have made my call," Ms. Edwards said, her voice clear and strong. "You're about to meet my son, and when he arrives, everything changes." The tension in the courtroom thickened. The prosecutor's face turned pale, and the judge's eyes flickered with uncertainty. This wasn't a normal courtroom drama. This wasn't a case that could be brushed under the rug. It was about to become a high-profile political scandal, one that the world would soon hear about. Outside the courtroom, the phone lines were already buzzing. Her son, the U.S. Attorney General, was no ordinary man. His influence was vast, his connections deep, and he had the resources to bring the entire judicial system crashing down if needed. As he made his way to the courthouse, he knew this wasn't just about his mother anymore. It was about exposing corruption at the highest levels. Back inside the courtroom, the judge cleared his throat, trying to regain some semblance of control. "This is a court of law," he said, though his voice betrayed the uncertainty creeping into his demeanor. Ms. Edwards didn't flinch. She stood tall, her eyes unwavering as she locked her gaze on the judge. "You have no idea what's coming," she said softly. And then, just as the judge was about to speak again, the doors to the courtroom swung open. All heads turned, the tension rising. The U.S. Attorney General had arrived. The doors to the courtroom flew open with a force that was almost symbolic of what was about to unfold. All eyes turned as the U.S. Attorney General, Raymond Edwards, Jr., stepped into the room. His presence was commanding, his every movement exuding power and authority. The once certain air of the courtroom now felt like a stage for an impending battle. "Your Honor, I believe it's time for a few truths to come to light," Raymond said, his voice calm yet firm, as though he was already in complete control. Judge Hayden's face turned a shade paler. The prosecutor's eyes widened, and for the first time, the courtroom felt like it was on the edge of a precipice. Judge Hayden straightened in his chair, trying to regain the upper hand. He cleared his throat, his hands shaking ever so slightly. "This is a court of law, Mr. Edwards. I'm afraid you have no business here." Raymond's eyes narrowed, and he took a step forward, his posture unwavering. "You may be the judge, Your Honor, but this is no longer your courtroom. You've just made a very grave mistake, and I'm here to correct it." The prosecutor opened his mouth to speak, but Raymond silenced him with a mere look. The prosecutor was out of his depth, and he knew it. Raymond turned to face the judge directly. "Let's not pretend here, Judge Hayden. I have information and evidence of all your corrupt works. You've been on the payroll of several corporations with vested interests in locking up innocent people. And that's exactly what you've done to my mother. Framed her for a crime she didn't commit." The room fell dead silent. A few gasps echoed throughout the courtroom. It was as though everyone had been holding their breath, unsure of what they'd just heard. Raymond continued, his voice gaining momentum. "I've seen the evidence. You've been manipulating cases for years, accepting bribes, and using your position to further your own wealth. And today you tried to make an innocent woman, a mother, a victim of your greed." Judge Hayden's face went white. He opened his mouth to protest, but his words caught in his throat. His once imposing figure now seemed small, insignificant. The walls of corruption that he had carefully built over the years were beginning to crumble before his eyes. "I'm sure you have a lot of excuses, Judge," Raymond said, his voice cold. "But the truth is, your actions have consequences. And now, it's time for you to face them." The judge stood up from his chair, his movements jerky and nervous. I have no idea what you're talking about. You have no right to come in here and make these accusations." "You're right," Raymond said, his voice unwavering. "I don't need permission to expose the truth." Raymond reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folder. He placed it on the judge's desk with a hard thud, causing a few people in the courtroom to flinch. The prosecutor's eyes widened as he saw the contents of the folder. "You have all the evidence?" he whispered, almost to himself. Raymond didn't respond directly. He simply turned to the judge and said, "You've been caught." The next few minutes were a blur of legal jargon and fast-moving accusations. Raymond pulled out documents, emails, and recordings, each one more damning than the last. It became clear that Judge Hayden had been using his position to frame people for crimes they hadn't committed, all in exchange for bribes from private corporations looking to profit from the suffering of others. As the prosecutor reluctantly examined the evidence, he knew that this was no longer a simple case of a corrupt judge. This was a scandal that could shake the foundations of the entire judicial system. Raymond had just exposed a network of corruption that went deeper than anyone could have imagined. With the evidence now laid out for everyone to see, the judge could no longer deny his actions. His once stern expression faltered, and a bead of sweat ran down his forehead. He knew the end had come. "Your Honor," Raymond said, his voice low but forceful, "you are under investigation for corruption, bribery, and the wrongful conviction of innocent people. You will be removed from your position, and I'll make sure you face the consequences for everything you've done." The judge's face went ashen. His mouth opened and closed as if he were trying to form words, but no sound came out. The reality of his downfall began to sink in. The man who had once held so much power in this courtroom was now powerless. As the judge was escorted from the courtroom, there was a moment of stunned silence. For the first time in what seemed like forever, the courtroom was filled with a sense of justice, true justice. Raymond turned to face his mother, his expression softening. Ms. Edwards, who had been watching the events unfold with a mixture of pride and relief, smiled at her son. It was a quiet moment, but it was full of meaning. A mother who had fought for her son, a son who had fought for her, and together they had taken down a corrupt system. Before the courtroom was dismissed, Raymond took one final step toward the prosecutor. "You should consider your position as well," he said quietly. "You'll be the subject of a full investigation. Don't think for a second that you're immune." As Raymond and Ms. Edwards walked out of the courtroom together, the weight of the day's events settled in. What had started as a wrongful conviction had turned into a groundbreaking revelation of corruption, changing the course of justice forever. The ripples of what had transpired would soon spread beyond this courthouse. The media had already caught wind of the story, and within hours, news outlets across the country were covering the massive scandal involving the judge and his decades-long history of corruption. Headlines blared, "Judge exposed in massive judicial scandal, U.S. Attorney General's mother at the center." The story was everywhere, on TV, social media, newspapers. People were watching. People were listening. And for the first time in a long time, they were realizing that maybe, just maybe, the system could be changed. As Raymond and Ms. Edwards sat down in the car, he turned to her, his expression softening. "I never thought I'd see the day when I'd have to fight for you, Mom. But I'm glad I did." She smiled, the weariness of the battle evident in her eyes, but so was the pride. "You've always been there for me, just like I've always been there for you. You've made me proud, son." Raymond's voice grew more reflective. "This wasn't just about us, Mom. This was about so much more. People like you, people like me, we can't keep letting things like this slide. The system has to change, and I'm going to make sure it does." Back in the courthouse, the atmosphere had shifted. The judge was gone, removed from his position, facing investigation and charges of corruption. His resignation had sent shockwaves through the judicial community, and now, legal professionals were scrambling to ensure that the same mistakes wouldn't be repeated. The prosecutor, once smug and confident, was now under heavy scrutiny. His actions in the case would be examined with a fine-toothed comb, and there was no guarantee that he would remain in his position for long. Raymond had already begun the process of calling for reforms in the legal system, making it clear that no one, no matter their rank or title, was beyond accountability. As they arrived at their home, Raymond turned to his mother. "I can't promise that everything will be easy from here on out, but I promise I'll fight for you, and for everyone who's been wronged by this system. We've only scratched the surface. I'm not going to stop until real change happens." Ms. Edwards nodded, her eyes reflecting the quiet strength that had carried her through years of hardship. "I know you won't, son. You've always fought for what's right." That evening, Raymond and his mother sat quietly, reflecting on everything that had transpired. The world outside was changing. People were talking about the case, about the corruption that had been exposed, and about the fight for justice that had just begun. But as they sat together, there was a deep sense of peace. The fight for justice wasn't just about one judge or one case. It was about changing the very fabric of a broken system. Raymond knew that this victory, while significant, was just the beginning. There was so much more to be done, and he wasn't going to stop until it was finished. Ms. Edwards, though tired, felt a deep sense of pride. She had never imagined her son would rise to such a powerful position. But even more than that, she never imagined the two of them would face corruption in such an extraordinary way. "What now, son?" she asked quietly, her voice carrying both curiosity and a sense of finality. Raymond smiled, his eyes determined. "Now we keep fighting. We make sure no one like Hayden ever gets to do this again. But more importantly, we keep pushing for change. Real change." Raymond's voice grew more passionate as he spoke, his eyes burning with conviction. "This isn't just about me or you, Mom. This is about everyone who's been wronged by the system. We can't keep letting people in power use their positions to hurt others. We have to keep pushing for the truth to come out, no matter the cost." His words were full of hope, not his mom but for everyone who had ever been a victim of an unjust system. It was a reminder that each individual had the power to make a difference, to fight for what was right, no matter how overwhelming the odds may seem. As Raymond stood up, he looked out the window, the last rays of the setting sun reflecting off the buildings. It was a new day, and with it came a new beginning. A future where justice, truth, and accountability could no longer be ignored. "Your story," Raymond said, looking at his mother with pride. "It's a story that needs to be told, not just for us, but for everyone who has been silenced or ignored. It's time to make sure the world knows that corruption doesn't have to be the norm." Ms. Edwards smiled softly, her heart swelling with gratitude. And you've made sure that everyone will hear it, son. You've made sure that people like us, people who've been pushed down, can stand tall. She looked at him, a mother's love and admiration shining in her eyes. You're not just my son. You're a force for good. You're the change this world needed. If you've learned something from this story, if you've felt the strength and resilience in the face of adversity, don't let it end here. Take a stand. Speak out. Demand justice. And make sure to share this video to help spread the message of hope, strength, and change. If you believe in justice, like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the bell icon so you never miss the next one. Together, we can make sure that stories like this don't go unnoticed. Because in the end, the fight for justice is a fight we can all win. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.